Moving on to problem E. On E, we've got, let's see, 5 over x minus 4 minus 3 over x minus 1 equals, we've got an x squared minus 1. Now notice though, this last denominator, if we want to find a common denominator that we're going to multiply by, all the denominators need to be factored. So I need to factor this last denominator. Well, the question becomes, what two factors of positive 4 give us negative 5? And that would be a negative 4 and a negative 1. So that would factor out as x minus 4 and x minus 1. I'm not really caring if I factor out the top because, remember, I'm looking for a common denominator. So what does that mean our common denominator is? Well, if you look at the denominators, the only separate terms they have is they have an x minus 4 and they have an x minus 1. So it would be just good enough to go ahead and use a common denominator of those two together, an x minus 4 and an x minus 1. So that's what we'll multiply each and every piece by, is an x minus 4 and an x minus 1. So let's go ahead and do that. So we had our 5 over x minus 4, our minus 3 over x minus 1 equals our x squared minus 1 over x minus 4, x minus 1. And again, we're going to multiply each and every piece by both of those, an x minus 4 and an x minus 1. So there's your first piece that's getting multiplied by that. Your second piece is also going to get multiplied by an x minus 4 and an x minus 1. And don't forget the big piece on the other side that's also going to get multiplied by an x minus 4 and an x minus 1. Okay, let's see what happens. Well, in that first fraction, the x minus 4's cancel, and you're left with a 5 and the x minus 1, which means we can distribute the 5 to the x minus 1, which will get us 5x minus 5. Now let's see what happens on the second piece here. We can cancel out the x minus 1, which, be careful, leaves you with a negative 3 and an x minus 4. So again, that leaves me with distributing a negative 3 to the x minus 4, which would give me a negative 3x plus 12 equals, well, at least the other side's a little bit nicer. What we can do on the other side is, well, the x minus 4 cancels and the x minus 1 cancels, which means I'm just left with the top, which is the x squared minus 1. Now let's work on combining like terms on the same side of the equation. So I can combine the 5x and the negative 3x, which will just give me a 2x. I can also combine the negative 5 and the positive 12, which will give me a 7. And this whole thing will equal x squared minus 1. Now notice we have a quadratic equation. How do we solve a quadratic equation? Well, it needs to be on one side of the equation so that the other side is a 0. So what I need to do is I need to move the x, the 2x, and the 7 over to the right-hand side with the x squared and the 1. So I'm going to move the 2x by subtracting 2x from both sides. I'm going to also move the 7 by, let's see, I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides. So what that will do is my left-hand side has now nothing, so I'll have a 0 there. I want to leave my x squared first on my right-hand side. I have nothing to combine with that 2x, so it's going to stay as a negative 2x. But with the numbers here, I had a negative 1, and I moved a negative 7, which will give me negative 8. Now the question is, I've got a quadratic equation here that now equals 0. Does it factor? So you'd be asking what two factors of 8 add up to negative 2? What two factors of negative 8 add up to negative 2? Well, that indeed does factor. The two factors are negative 4 and positive 2. So that would be x minus 4 and x plus 2. But then you have to set both of those equal to 0. The x minus 4 needs to be equal to 0, and the x plus 2 needs to be set equal to 0, which gives the two answers 4 and negative 2. Now, again, you have to check these two answers. Just because you got them doesn't mean they work, and this is a perfect example. The answer x equals 4, if we go back up to the original problem, remember our first denominator was an x minus 4. So, if we plug in 4 to that denominator, it will make the denominator 0. So, that answer of 4 will not work. That cannot be used. However, the answer of negative 2 will work. It doesn't make either denominator 0.